A K-9 officer tore down a student's locker decorations, and what tumbled out wasn't just shocking, it triggered a statewide sting operation. Why was a quiet honor student hiding a loaded weapon wrapped in birthday streamers? Here's what happened, but before we get into the story, drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. It was supposed to be a routine security sweep. The final bell had rung, lockers slammed shut, and the corridors of Willow Creek High buzzed with teenage chatter fading into silence. Officer Ramirez, a retired Marine turned school resource officer, walked alongside Shadow, a seasoned K-9 with more commendations than most humans. They were the school's quiet guardians, respected, not feared. Every student knew the sound of Shadow's paws on the tile floors meant safety was nearby. But as they rounded the corner near the junior hallway, something shifted. Shadow's nose twitched. His body stiffened. The fur along his spine bristled. And then, with a suddenness that startled even Ramirez, Shadow lunged forward, straight at a cluster of balloons and crepe paper strung across Locker 318. Decorations fluttered. Confetti exploded into the air like a premature celebration. A birthday card tore in half midair. But what hit the floor wasn't festive. What landed with a metallic clatter sent a shockwave of cold adrenaline through Ramirez's chest. A gun. Small, heavy, worn, wrapped hastily in a gray hoodie with a faded school crest. It slid across the linoleum and stopped at his boot. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Shadow let out a low, guttural growl that echoed down the empty hall. Ramirez reached for his radio, voice calm but clipped. "Dispatch, this is Officer Ramirez. I need immediate assistance. Possible firearm recovered from student locker." He knelt beside the weapon, not touching it, just staring. He knew guns. He knew what they could do. And he knew this wasn't just some abandoned prop or forgotten family heirloom. This was loaded, ready, intentional. By the time backup arrived, the hallway had transformed into a crime scene. Yellow tape went up. Administrators whispered. Teachers peeked from classroom doors with pale faces and wide eyes. And all the while, Shadow sat like a statue beside Locker 318, his gaze locked on the tarnished weapon as if daring it to move. Ramirez took a deep breath. "Find out who owns this locker," he told the principal, who was already flipping through a spiral-bound list. When she found the name, her lips parted in disbelief. "Aiden Mitchell," she said. "Junior, quiet kid, never even had detention." Ramirez felt his jaw tighten. It was never the ones you expected. He turned to Shadow, gave him a firm pat on the neck. "Good boy," he muttered. But inside, his gut twisted. Because this wasn't over. This wasn't just a kid and a gun. This was the tip of something bigger. He could feel it. And as students filtered out of the building, unaware of the storm brewing behind the police tape, one question burned in Ramirez's mind. What the hell was that gun doing in Locker 3118? The locker belonged to Aiden Mitchell, a quiet junior with perfect attendance and a knack for fading into the background. No disciplinary history, no missed homework. The kind of kid teachers described as respectful, the kind whose name you only noticed when grades came out or attendance sheets were reviewed. But when Officer Ramirez entered room 2114 and called his name, every head turned. Aiden sat near the back, earbuds out, eyes wide like he already knew why they were there. He stood slowly, backpack slung over one shoulder, not resisting. Not speaking, not even blinking when Ramirez clicked the cuffs around his wrists. The classroom held its breath. One girl gasped. A pencil clattered to the floor. Phones buzzed quietly beneath desks as fingers typed furiously. But Aiden said nothing. Not to the teacher, not to his classmates, not even to Ramirez. Not until they were halfway down the corridor, Shadow's paws echoing beside them. That's when Aiden looked down at the dog, just for a second, and whispered so softly, Ramirez almost missed it. "He told me to keep it safe." That single sentence sliced through Ramirez's mind like a razor. Who was he? And what was Aiden protecting? In the holding room, Aiden didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't demand a parent. He sat stiffly in the metal chair, eyes locked on the floor, lips pressed into a line. Ramirez watched him from behind the glass, flanked by the assistant principal and two uniformed officers. Shadow lay beside him, motionless except for the occasional flick of an ear. The silence stretched. Finally, Ramirez walked in, alone. No clipboard, no script. Just a man and a kid and a dog who could smell the tension in the air like gasoline waiting for a spark. Ramirez knelt beside Shadow, scratched behind his ears, then looked Aiden in the eye. I need to know who gave you that gun. Aiden didn't flinch, but his throat bobbed once, and then his voice, cracked, tired, broke the quiet. It wasn't mine. I didn't even want it. But he said he'd hurt my mom if I told anyone. Ramirez's breath caught. There it was. Not guilt, not anger. Fear, deep and raw and suffocating. The kind you can't fake. Aiden reached into his pocket, hand still cuffed, and slid out a wrinkled note. Ramirez opened it slowly. It wasn't a confession. It was a warning. Handwritten instructions with times, dates, and a final line that chilled him. Do what you're told or she disappears. This wasn't just about a kid hiding a gun. This was manipulation, coercion. And suddenly, Ramirez wasn't looking at a suspect. He was looking at a victim caught in a net. Shadow growled low and steady, sensing what was coming, because this wasn't about Aiden anymore. It was about the one pulling the strings. And Ramirez knew in his gut that the real threat hadn't even entered the building yet, confessions in the dark. The interrogation room wasn't built for comfort. It was all steel and silence, the hum of the flickering fluorescent light above pulsing like a second heartbeat. Shadow lay at Ramirez's feet, his massive frame still, but his ears twitched with every breath Aiden took. The boy sat curled in on himself, knees drawn up, fingers clenched tight around the edges of the chair like he was holding on for dear life. His voice trembled when he spoke, raw and hoarse from hours of quiet. It wasn't mine, he whispered again, like saying it enough times might make it true. He told me if I didn't hide it, he'd hurt my mom. Ramirez leaned forward, elbows on the table, his tone low, steady. The way you talk to someone standing on the ledge. Who? Aiden swallowed hard, blinking fast. Colton, he said. Colton Briggs, he's a senior. Transferred in at the start of the semester. He saw me outside after practice 2 weeks ago in the parking lot. Ramirez's jaw tightened. What did you see? Aiden's hands shook now, visible tremors as he wrung them together. He was with some guy in a black SUV, big one, tinted windows, no plates. They were talking, and then Colton opened his bag. There were stacks of cash, like a lot, and something wrapped in duct tape. He handed it to the guy. They did that handshake, the kind that's too long, like it means something. Shadow gave a soft grunt, sensing the spike in Aiden's fear. Ramirez nodded slowly. And Colton saw you? Aiden looked up for the first time, eyes red and hollow. Yeah, he smiled. Not like a friendly smile, like he was already planning what to do. Ramirez kept his voice calm, though his mind was racing. What happened next? Next day, Aiden said, voice cracking. He came up to me in the hallway, said he knew where my mom worked, said accidents happen when people get nosy. Then he handed me that hoodie and told me to keep it in my locker until he said otherwise, and if I said anything... He stopped, his throat tightening like a knot. He said she'd be the one bleeding, not him. For a moment, there was nothing but the hum of the light and the soft rise and fall of Shadow's breathing. Ramirez exhaled through his nose, steadying himself. He'd seen this before. Kids turned into pawns, used and discarded by people who never got their hands dirty. You did the right thing coming clean, he said gently. Aiden didn't respond, but a tear slid down his cheek and hit the metal table with a soft tap. Ramirez stood, walked around the table, and knelt beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. You're not alone in this, son. Not anymore. Shadow rose too, pressing his nose gently to Aiden's hand. And just like that, the first crack in the silence had become a flood. The secrets were out. And Ramirez knew this wasn't just one dirty deal in a parking lot. This was a thread, and he was about to start pulling parking lot shadows. It was a Wednesday, unusually warm for late spring, and the sun had already dipped below the treetops by the time Aiden Mitchell stepped off the practice field and started the long walk home. He cut across the back lot like he always did, past the rusted fence, past the row of unused bleachers, past the staff parking spaces that always seemed too empty too early. But that day, something was off. The air felt heavier, the silence too perfect. And then he saw it, a black SUV idling near the edge of the lot, its engine low and steady like a purring animal, windows tinted so dark it mirrored the setting sun. Aiden ducked behind a trash bin, curiosity tangled with caution, and peered out just in time to see Colton Briggs step into view. Colton didn't move like a high school senior. He moved like someone who didn't worry about being seen. He carried a worn duffel bag in one hand, slung low, casually, like it weighed nothing. The SUV's back door opened. A man stepped out, tall, mid-30s maybe, buzzed hair, face hidden behind sunglasses despite the fading. Light. No handshake yet. First came the open of the bag, then a flick of the man's eyes down to its contents. He nodded once. Then the handshake, long, tight, not the kind friends gave, but the kind that sealed something. The kind that said, "We both know what this is." Aiden's breath caught. He saw something wrapped in duct tape being pulled from the bag. He couldn't tell what was inside, but the shape, rectangular, dense, too uniform to be clothes. Cash changed hands. The man slipped it into his coat without a word. That's when Colton turned, as if sensing eyes, and saw Aiden. Their eyes locked. Aiden froze. Colton didn't yell, he didn't panic, he just smiled. Wide, slow, like someone who'd just chosen his next move. The next morning, Aiden's locker was decorated with a balloon and a sticky note that read, "Keep your mouth shut or your mom never makes it home." No signature, no explanation. But enough. He got the message. And so did his silence. Now, 2 weeks later, Officer Ramirez sat alone in the security office, replaying grainy parking lot footage pulled from a side-angle camera half covered in grime. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the flickering screen illuminating the hard lines of his face. There it was, the SUV, time-stamped, just like Aiden said. Colton, the bag, the exchange, the man in the glasses, the handshake, the pattern. Ramirez's heart thudded slow and heavy. This wasn't a one-off. This wasn't two kids with a bad idea. This was organized, professional, predatory. He reached down and rested a hand on Shadow's neck. The dog's head lifted, eyes sharp, reading the tension in Ramirez's breath. "We've got something real here, boy," he muttered. "This is bigger than just Aiden." He backed the footage up again, frame by frame, freezing on Colton's smile. That smile was a signature. And now, it was a lead, the drop spot. The pattern wasn't hard to find, once you knew what to look for. Officer Ramirez stared at the overlapping parking lot footage, scrubbing through the timestamps, watching Thursday after Thursday unfold like a broken record, stuck on repeat. Same SUV, blacked out, untraceable plates, always parked at the far end near the maintenance shed. Same time, right after last bell, when the lot was still full of movement, but supervision had thinned. And Colton Briggs, always there first, walking slow like he had nowhere to be, duffel bag in hand, eyes scanning for the next face. It was subtle, surgical even. Each time a different student approached. Never rushed, never forced. Just a quiet word, a subtle nod, and then the exchange. Bags changing hands, backpacks opening briefly. Bundle of cash passed with the ease of a lunch trade. Nothing aggressive, nothing loud. But Ramirez had seen deals go down in war zones, and this was no different. What chilled him more than anything was the kids. Honor roll names. student council faces, track team captains and yearbook photographers. Not gang affiliates, not troublemakers, just ordinary students with futures now dangling over a cliff. Shadow paced behind him, ears perked every time the SUV appeared on screen, tail twitching as if he too could smell the rot behind the curtain. Ramirez leaned closer to the monitor, freezing on one clip where Colton pressed a hand to a student's shoulder, a quiet freshman named Eli Navarro, and whispered something that made the boy flinch. No sound, just body language. But it said everything: control, fear, pressure. These weren't partnerships, these were recruitments, groomed through manipulation, sealed with threats. Aiden hadn't been the first. He'd just been the first to flinch. Ramirez pulled the school's attendance logs, cross-referenced them with camera footage, and the names kept stacking up. 6 students, all with sudden shifts in behavior, all recently connected to Colton through shared classes or team rosters. None had been reported missing homework, but a few had started missing sleep, according to teacher notes. Dark circles, jumpy answers. One even withdrew from basketball without explanation. Ramirez didn't need a psychologist to tell him what that meant. These kids were being used. They were mules, and no one noticed because the system had been built on their silence. He stood and ran a hand down Shadow's back, grounding himself in the steady presence of the dog who'd started it all. They used the school, he muttered, his voice low, bitter. Used these kids like they were tools, but not anymore. The threads were unraveling, and Shadow had yanked the first one. What began as one suspicious locker had exploded into a web, stretching far beyond the halls of Willow Creek High. Ramirez looked at the list again. 6 names. 6 futures already altered. He wasn't about to let there be a 7th. The drop spot was no. Longer a mystery. Now it was bait. State lines and smoke trails. The gun had been traced in less than 24 hours. Its serial number matching a report from a break-in 2 towns over. A quiet neighborhood where the most common crime was lawnmower theft. But that night, someone had shattered a sliding glass door, bypassed the family's alarm, and walked out with a case of firearms registered to a retired police sergeant. The pistol in Aiden's locker had been one of them. Ramirez stared at the crime report, thumb tapping against the table, eyes narrowed in thought. This wasn't random. This wasn't just some kid bringing a weapon to school. It was product, moved, planted, distributed, and the SUV tied to a name already sitting on a state task force radar. No arrest record, no clear residence, but mentioned 3 times in sealed reports Ramirez couldn't access, at least not through official channels. So he did what any Marine would. He called in a favor. Nate Dorsey, former recon-turned-narcotics agent, picked up on the second ring. Ramirez didn't need to say much. Just the word Colton, a description of the SUV and school drop site. That was enough. The next day, Ramirez got an encrypted file dumped into his inbox, under a ghost email. No subject line. He opened it in the back office. Shadow at his feet. Tension wound tight in his chest. Colton Briggs. 16, mother deceased. Father unknown. Legal guardian listed as Marcus L. Briggs, known alias Ledge, mid-level gang enforcer, under federal investigation for multi-state narcotics trafficking. No direct charges, but flagged repeatedly in sting operations stretching across 3 counties. And Colton? His name had been whispered around a juvenile diversion program 5 months prior, in a sealed case involving a missing shipment of prescription opioids. No one pressed charges. The kid disappeared from the system. Until now. Ramirez sat back in his chair, heart pounding, every instinct honed in combat, telling him what this was. Distribution through students wasn't new, it was smart. No one suspects the straight-A kid, the star athlete, the soft-spoken freshman too scared to say no. Willow Creek High was the perfect front, clean, suburban, untouched by the things people pretend only happen somewhere else. But Ramirez had been places like this before. Just with different names, Different uniforms. Shadow let out a quiet huff, sensing the shift in the air. Ramirez stood, paced once, then leaned on the edge of the desk, eyes locked on the screen. "They're using our school," he said under his breath, "running their pipeline through the safest building in town." He picked up the list of students connected to Colton's Thursday drops, 6 names, and beside them the question he couldn't shake. How many others were out there? And how far did the trail go? Shadow's ears perked as if answering. Ramirez knew what had to come next. This wasn't about catching a kid with a gun anymore. This was about cutting off the head of something much deeper. The smoke trail didn't stop at the parking lot. It crossed state lines, and they were finally starting to follow it. Operation Bellringer. They named it Operation Bellringer because they knew the sound of that first school bell would echo louder than ever before. Not just through the hallways of Willow Creek High, but across an entire state network that had been asleep for too long. The sting launched at midnight. Blueprints rolled out across folding tables in the back of a county command van, surveillance screens flickering with satellite heat maps, license plate scans, and facial recognition flags. Undercover units parked just beyond the school fence line, buried under landscaping gear and food delivery stickers. Drones patrolled the perimeter like silent birds of prey. The entire plan hinged on the rhythm of a regular morning, the predictable choreography of backpacks, morning greetings, locker doors clanging open, and synchronized chaos. And right in the middle of it all, Officer Ramirez walked the halls with his usual calm, nodding to students, chatting with teachers, never once letting on that his earpiece was live with chatter from a dozen tactical units closing in. But Shadow knew. His body language shifted with every hallway pass. His ears moved like antennas, twitching toward locker clicks, the scent of nervous sweat, the faint chemical tang of something not meant to be in a school. The tension sat thick between his shoulders like a coiled spring. Ramirez could feel it too. The plan was to wait until the next drop, to confirm the exchange, collect the bag, follow the pipeline up the chain. But when Colton Briggs stepped through the front doors at 7:58 a.m., duffel bag in hand, hoodie pulled low, and headphones blasting music no one else could hear, Shadow didn't wait. He locked eyes with Colton, ears pinning back, legs stiffening like pistons. One step, two. Then he launched. Ramirez shouted, too late to stop him. Shadow hit Colton's chest like a missile, driving him backwards against a row of lockers with a metallic crash. The duffel bag hit the floor and unzipped on impact, its contents spilling like a confession. Plastic-wrapped pills, 2 handguns, burner phones, and a flash drive clattering across the tiles. Students screamed, teachers flinched, and then 3 other boys, previously invisible, just faces in the crowd, stopped mid-step, each one holding identical bags. One dropped his on instinct. Another tried to run. The third froze, eyes wide, mouth trembling. Officers swarmed from every entrance, shouting commands, locking down exits. The sting was no longer covert. It was crashing through the school like a tidal wave. Colton fought, yelling that it wasn't his, but Shadow pinned him without a single bark, steady as a stone, his body shielding Ramirez as the duffel's contents were cataloged piece by piece. And for the first time, Colton didn't smile. In the chaos, Ramirez's radio crackled with updates. Warehouse raids triggered, secondary suspects in custody, evidence already being pulled from burner data. The operation had begun with a dog's lunge, and now it was burning through every lie these hallways had been hiding. Bellringer had rung, and the sound wasn't just a bell, it was a reckoning, the silent network. In the days that followed, the dust refused to settle. One name led to another, and then another, until the list grew longer than anyone was prepared for. Students from 4 different schools across the district, some as far as 2 hours away, surfaced in connection to Colton's network. Their roles eerily similar. Quiet kids, clean records, all recruited in whispers behind vending machines near gym doors, in the far corners of the internet where adult eyes rarely reached. Each had a story of coercion, of threats made through burner numbers, of untraceable messages promising safety in exchange for silence. And just like Aiden, they'd said nothing. Until now, parents sat across from school officials in tense meetings, their expressions torn between disbelief and betrayal. How had this slipped under their noses? How had a pipeline of fear crept into the hallways they thought were safe? Principals demanded answers from law enforcement. District officials scheduled press conferences that never seemed to say enough. But Ramirez knew the hardest part wasn't cleaning up the fallout. It was what came next. Because silence doesn't break overnight, especially when it's been weaponized. The students who came forward did so in fragments. One boy slid a note under his counselor's door. A girl confessed only after her little brother was threatened. Another broke down in a nurse's office, sobbing over a math test she couldn't concentrate on. Every confession added weight to the story, and every story confirmed the truth. The network wasn't just built on drugs or money. It was built on fear. But it wasn't fear that haunted Ramirez the most. It was watching Aiden Mitchell return to school under a new kind of spotlight. The whispers followed him like shadows. No matter how many teachers told the students to be kind, no matter how many counselors tried to explain he wasn't at fault, whispers don't care about truth. They cling to spectacle. He walked the halls with his head down, earbuds in, sleeves tugged over nervous hands. A few classmates offered a nod, a half smile, but most just stared. Ramirez saw it every day, standing at the corner of the hallway near the flagpole. Shadow at his side, eyes trained not just on danger, but on the aftermath. Shadow's patrols had changed too. He walked with his head a little higher now, movements sharper, more attuned to every breath of tension in the air. He'd earned a medal, a plaque, a photo on the principal's wall. But none of that mattered to him. He watched people, he read pain, he listened, and Ramirez, more than anyone, understood what that meant. Because this wasn't just about catching bad guys anymore. It was about healing what fear had broken. And healing, Ramirez knew, never came with a parade. It came in quiet moments, in the decision to come back to school, in the way Aiden lingered by Shadow's side for an extra second each morning. It wasn't over. Not for Aiden, not for Ramirez, and certainly not for Shadow, who now patrolled like he could smell what fear tried to bury when the media came. The first news van arrived, before first period, dragging cables across the sidewalk like veins pulsing with anticipation. By mid-morning, there were 4 more, satellite dishes spinning skyward, microphones pointed like weapons, anchors rehearsing sound bites with expressions caught somewhere between reverence and hunger. The headlines were already rolling out. Hero dog uncovers drug ring, K9 saves school, lockdown leads to liberation. Camera flashes lit up the front office windows. Parents pulled their kids closer at drop-off, their smiles tight and brittle. It all felt like a movie, except to the people who had lived it. Officer Ramirez watched from inside the security vestibule, arms crossed, jaw tight. He declined the interview requests without hesitation. They asked for his story, for a quote, for access to Shadow, as if the dog were a celebrity instead of a soldier with 4 legs and a steel spine. But Ramirez knew better. This wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a miracle. It was the result of instincts honed through years of darkness, of midnight raids overseas, of loss, of learning how to read a room with a glance and a dog's ears. It was trust, the kind that couldn't be captured in a headline or framed in a newspaper. Shadow didn't need fame. He needed focus. And Ramirez wouldn't allow the mission to be cheapened into clicks and segments between weather reports. Aiden Mitchell, meanwhile, stayed invisible. He didn't speak to cameras. He didn't return messages. He didn't want to be the face of survival. The boy who once disappeared into crowds now sat in empty corners, hood pulled low, silence clinging to him like a second skin. But everyone knew. They knew what he'd carried. They knew what he'd risked by speaking up. And more than anything, they knew how close it all came to staying hidden forever. That Friday, the principal called an emergency student assembly. She stood on stage in the packed gymnasium, voice trembling as she spoke not about safety protocols, not about PR, but about courage, about paying attention, about what it means to protect each other when the system fails to. Then she nodded to the side curtain, and Shadow stepped onto the stage beside Ramirez, not dressed in anything flashy, no banner behind him, just a simple harness and those eyes that had seen more truth than most people could bear. The gym went dead silent. No applause, just breath, held collectively. And then a whisper. One boy, front row, hands trembling on his knees, whispering, "Thank you." Shadow looked straight at him, ears flicking. Maybe he knew, maybe he didn't, but Ramirez saw it. The shift, the weight shared, the pain acknowledged. That moment didn't make the evening news. There were no pull quotes. But for those who were there, it was louder than the headlines. Not a miracle, not even a victory, just a reminder that sometimes heroes don't bark, they just listen. And sometimes the only story worth telling is the one where someone finally feels safe enough to say nothing at all. The locker's legacy, Locker 318, is still there, sealed with red tape, the lock jammed shut, a yellow evidence tag fluttering just beneath the number like a forgotten warning. Students pass it every day now, quieter than they used to, their eyes darting toward it like they expect it to blink or breathe. No one touches it. No one dares. The janitors clean around it. The school board hasn't decided what to do with it yet. But everyone knows it can't go back to what it was. Because it's not just a locker anymore. It's a landmark. The kind people lower their voices around, the kind that leaves a shadow long after the lights are turned off. What happened inside those steel walls didn't just shake one school, it rippled across a state. More schools began installing K-9 units almost overnight. Budgets were reallocated. Town hall meetings overflowed. Parents who once asked about homework policies now demanded to know how often lockers were searched, how school security teams were trained, how many kids were walking their own silent path through fear. No one had answers fast enough, but they were asking, and that mattered. As for Aiden, he never went back to the same seat in class. He switched schedules quietly, moved his locker to a different wing, started walking shadow with Ramirez in the mornings before school. The hallway whispers eventually faded, replaced by something softer, more respectful. Not because the students forgot, but because they learned what silence can cost. He began volunteering at the local animal shelter on weekends, sorting blankets and cleaning kennels, talking to dogs like they were old friends. Maybe they were. Maybe that was the only place he didn't feel like a headline. When someone asked him once why he did it, he just shrugged and said, "I'm not scared anymore. Not while Shadow's still out there." And maybe that was the legacy too. Not just what was stopped, but what started. Because what fell out of that locker wasn't just a gun, it was a broken chain of silence. It was the face of fear. It was a system stretched to the edge that finally got caught. But more than anything, it was the truth. Tangible, heavy, hold. Truth that rolled out onto the linoleum floor and refused to be ignored. Truth that made headlines and forced action. Truth that barked, growled, lunged, and stood between a school and the kind of darkness no one ever thinks will touch their town. And it was a K-9 who made sure it didn't go unnoticed. A dog who didn't flinch when the danger got too close. A dog who didn't need words to say, "Not here." Locker 318 might one day be unsealed, emptied, replaced, but the story won't leave, because there are some legacies you don't rewrite. And as long as Shadow's paws echo down those halls, the truth that spilled from that locker will never be buried again.